So let's talk about June 6th, 1944. On that day, the Allies kicked off the largest amphibious invasion in the history of warfare. It was an operation that would completely change the course of World War II and begin the long road to liberating Europe. This is the amazing story of D-Day.
I mean, just think about it. The sheer scale, the complexity of it all, it was just unimaginable. It all came down to a mix of secrecy, overwhelming force, and just incredible courage. So the big question is, how in the world did the Allies manage to pull off the single most daring invasion in all of military history?
Okay, so to really get why this invasion was so crucial, we've got to rewind a bit. By the early 1940s, Nazi Germany had this terrifying grip on pretty much the entire European continent. We're talking from the coast of France all the way to the Soviet Union's doorstep.
At the same time, the Soviet Union was just locked in this incredibly brutal, bloody fight on the Eastern Front. So, at the Tehran Conference in 1943, the Allied leaders, Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, they all agreed on one thing. To beat Germany, they had to open up a second major front in the West. There was just no other way.
And this massive plan was given a code name that, honestly, couldn't have been more perfect for its ambition: Operation Overlord. This was the master plan, the whole shebang for the invasion of Normandy, and the man in charge was American General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Now, to pull something like this off, you need to build up of forces like nothing the world had ever seen before. Seriously, the south of England basically turned into one giant military base. It was just packed to the gills with soldiers, tanks, planes, and mountains of supplies. Everyone just waiting for the green light.
And get this number in your head: 3 million. That's how many Allied soldiers, sailors, and airmen were brought together for this one single invasion. It's a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your mind around, and every single one of them was a piece of this monumental puzzle.
Okay, but you can't exactly move 3 million people around without the enemy noticing, right? So how did they keep that crucial element of surprise? Well, the answer is it's one of the most brilliant and complex deception campaigns in the history of warfare.
It was called Operation Bodyguard, and the goal was simple on paper, but incredibly difficult in practice: convince the Germans that the real invasion was going to happen somewhere completely different. It was all about protecting the actual plan, just like a bodyguard. So the German high command was totally convinced the invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais. I mean, it makes sense. It's the shortest distance across the English Channel. And the Allies, they decided to use that against them. They created a whole phantom army. I'm talking inflatable tanks, fake radio chatter, the works, all aimed right at Calais. But all the while, the real target was way down the coast in Normandy, chosen specifically for its long, suitable beaches. All right, so the deception is in place. The troops are ready. The stage is set. June 6th, 1944, D-Day. A day that would go down in history as the longest day. The whole operation unfolded in these incredibly precise stages. It all kicked off in the dead of night. You've got elite American and British paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines. Their job is to create chaos and capture key bridges and roads. Then, just before dawn, comes this massive bombardment from the air and the sea, just pounding the German defenses along the coast. And finally, as the sun comes up, the main event begins: the landings on the beaches. By the time that day was over, more than 150,000 Allied troops were on French soil. Now, this assault was spread out across a 50-mile stretch of coastline, split into 5 codenamed beaches. And honestly, each beach has its own harrowing story. At Utah Beach, American forces got inland pretty quickly. But just a few miles away at Omaha, well, their fellow Americans faced a complete nightmare of heavy defenses and devastating gunfire. And over to the east, you had the British and Canadian forces at Gold, Juno, and Sword, fighting tooth and nail against some really tough resistance to carve out their own beachheads. Let's just stop and think about this for a second. Over 2,000 American casualties on one beach in one day. The fighting in Omaha was just unbelievably brutal. The soldiers were running into machine gun nests, mortar fire. It was a kill zone. It was, without a doubt, the highest price paid on D-Day. So you might be wondering, why couldn't the Germans just push them back into the sea? Well, this is where that great deception, Operation Bodyguard, really paid off. Hitler was so sure that Normandy was just a diversion, that the real attack was still coming at Calais, that he refused to release his powerful panzer tank divisions. By the time he finally figured out his catastrophic mistake, it was too late.
The Allies already had their foothold.
So the successful landings on D-Day, they weren't the end of the war, not by a long shot, but they were, as Winston Churchill so famously put it, the beginning of the end.
You see, D-Day was just step one, breaking through Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The weeks after were filled with some of the most brutal fighting of the war in the dense hedgerows of Normandy. But finally, in late July, Operation Cobra let the Allies break out of that stalemate. And that led to a lightning-fast advance across France, culminating in the incredible liberation of Paris in August. But all of this freedom, it came at an incredible price. On D-Day alone, the Allies took about 10,000 casualties. German losses are estimated somewhere around 4,000 to 9,000, and behind every single one of those numbers is a personal story of courage and of ultimate sacrifice.
So what's the big picture here? What was the ultimate impact? Well, D-Day was without a doubt the turning point of the war in the West. It finally trapped Germany in that devastating two-front war they could never win. And it showed the world a level of Allied cooperation between land, sea, and air forces that was just totally unprecedented.
And that really brings us to our final thought here. If you go to the beaches of Normandy today, they're peaceful, you'll see memorials and cemeteries dotting the coastline, but the legacy of what happened there, that endures. It's this incredibly powerful symbol of what nations can do when they unite against tyranny, and of the immense sacrifice that it takes. So the question I'll leave you with is this: what does that legacy of unity and sacrifice mean to us in the world we live in today?